June the 8th, 1708, off the coast of Cartagena, a Spanish galleon named the San José is running for port with the largest fortune ever loaded onto a single ship in the history of the Atlantic world. Gold, silver, and emeralds, gathered over years from mines across an entire continent, meant to reach the King of Spain and keep his war machine funded for another year. A British naval squadron catches her in open water. The battle lasts less than an hour. Then, without warning, the San José's powder magazine ignites. In minutes, the ship that was carrying what today would be somewhere between $4 and $20 billion in treasure is gone, along with almost every one of the roughly 600 people aboard her. That would already be one of the most staggering financial losses in maritime history. What makes this story different from every other treasure fleet we've covered on this channel is that it isn't finished. 300 years later, this shipwreck is sitting at the center of a live, unresolved legal and economic battle involving the government of Colombia, an American salvage company, and a fortune so large that a sitting head of state has made recovering it a personal priority before he leaves office. So let's take this apart properly. How a cargo like this actually got built in the first place, why the ship never made it home, and who, right now, in real time, is trying to claim what's left of it. Start with what the San José actually was, because Treasure Ship undersells it. She was a 62-gun galleon, one of the most heavily armed vessels the Spanish crown could put to sea, and she wasn't hauling this cargo casually. By 1708, Spain has been fighting the War of the Spanish Succession for years, an exhausting, expensive conflict over who gets to sit on the Spanish throne, and wars like this one are financed the same way every war in this empire gets financed, with silver and gold shipped home from the colonies. This isn't state property sitting in a hold either. A meaningful share of what the San José carried belonged to private merchants in Peru and across the Spanish colonies, men who had put up their own capital, paid to have their goods registered through the Crown's trade bureaucracy, and were trusting an armed convoy system to get their fortunes safely across an ocean that had already claimed fleets before this one. Layer on top of that the Crown's own quinto, its 20% cut of everything mined, and you start to understand the scale of what was riding on this single hull. Historians studying the ship's manifest estimate roughly 11 million gold and silver coins aboard, along with a substantial quantity of emeralds, almost certainly sourced from the mines at Muzo, in what's now Colombia, some of the finest emeralds the world has ever produced. Here's what that kind of cargo costs you before it's ever at risk from a single cannonball. Outfitting and crewing a warship-grade galleon of this size runs into serious money on its own. You need trained gun crews, not just sailors, because a ship like this is expected to fight its way home if it has to, not simply outrun trouble. Add the cost of provisioning several hundred men for a transatlantic crossing, the insurance premiums merchants were increasingly paying by this period, against exactly the kind of loss that had already sunk fleets in 1622 and would sink another in 1715, and the simple opportunity cost of capital that's been sitting, converted into coin, waiting for a convoy slot, instead of being put to work. And you're paying all of that before you've accounted for the single biggest risk factor in the entire system in 1708. Specifically, you are trying to move the largest treasure shipment in years directly through a war zone, because the same conflict that made Spain desperate for this silver was also the reason a British squadron was waiting for it. That squadron was commanded by Commodore Charles Wager, and he wasn't chasing the San José out of patriotism alone. Naval prize money in this period is a formal, legally structured incentive system. Capture an enemy ship and its cargo during wartime, and a share of the value gets distributed straight up the chain of command, from the crew, to the captain, to the admiralty itself. Wager's squadron wasn't simply trying to disrupt Spain's war financing, though that mattered too. They were hunting what might have been the single largest prize payout available anywhere in the Atlantic that year. When the fighting started, accounts describe a chaotic, close-range engagement, and at some point during it, the San José's magazine detonated. Historians still debate exactly why. A lucky hit, an accident under pressure, poor handling of powder during a desperate fight, but the result wasn't in dispute for anyone watching from the other ships that day. The San José didn't slowly founder. She was there, and then she wasn't, and with her went both the ship and almost the entire fortune it carried, straight to the bottom of the Caribbean, out of reach of the very navy that had just tried to seize it. For nearly 300 years, that was the end of the story. The wreck became a legend, the holy grail of shipwrecks, the subject of decades of speculation, failed searches, and one very consequential claim. In the early 1980s, an American company, then known as Glauca Mora, later Sea Search Armada, said it had located coordinates matching the wreck and reported them to the Colombian government under an agreement that entitled it to a share of whatever was eventually recovered. Then, in 2015, the Colombian Navy, working with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, announced it had found the wreck at a different, confidential location, roughly 2,000 feet down, off Cartagena, and confirmed its identity through distinguishing features on the wreck itself. Colombia has treated the discovery as its own ever since. Sea Search Armada disagrees, and the two sides have been locked in international arbitration for years over a claim now reported at somewhere around $10 billion, roughly half of the treasure's estimated worth. This is where the economics of the San José stop being a 300-year-old story and become a genuinely live one. In November of 2025, a Colombian-led expedition finally began physically recovering material from the wreck, using remotely operated vehicles at nearly 2,000 feet of depth, and brought up the first objects anyone has touched since 1708, a bronze cannon inscribed with the word Sevilla, a porcelain cup, and a small handful of hand-struck gold coins known as macuquinas. Colombia's government has been explicit that this is framed as a scientific and archaeological project, not a treasure hunt. Officials have gone out of their way to describe it as heritage recovery rather than salvage. But the numbers attached to the wreck make that framing hard to fully separate from the money. Estimates of the total cargo's modern value range enormously, from roughly $4 billion on the conservative end to as high as $20 billion, which would make the San José, by a wide margin, the most valuable shipwreck ever located anywhere on Earth. And Colombia isn't the only party with a claim on it. Spain has argued that as a sunken state warship, the San José retains sovereign immunity under international law, meaning it may never have stopped being Spanish property, no matter whose waters it rests in. Indigenous communities in Bolivia, whose ancestors provided the forced labor that pulled much of this silver out of the ground in the first place, have separately raised claims of their own to a share of whatever's recovered, arguing that the wealth was never simply Spain's or Colombia's to begin with. It was extracted at a human cost that hasn't been accounted for in any of the legal arguments about ownership. Layer Sea Search Armada's decades-old contractual claim on top of that, and you have, right now, in real time, one of the most complicated ownership disputes over a single asset anywhere in the world, a genuine four-way argument over a fortune that has been sitting untouched at the bottom of the ocean since before the United States existed. So run the numbers the way we always do on this channel, except this time there's no reconstruction needed, because the stakes are sitting in actual, current legal filings rather than fragments of a 4-century-old ledger. If Colombia's position holds, and the wreck is treated purely as national cultural heritage, the treasure never becomes liquid wealth at all. It becomes museum pieces, research material, a national symbol, with essentially none of it converted into cash for any private claimant, Sea Search Armada included. If the arbitration tribunal instead sides substantially with Sea Search Armada's claim, you could be looking at a payout in the range of $10 billion flowing to a private company decades after it first reported a set of coordinates, which would make it one of the largest single arbitration awards connected to a shipwreck in history. And if Spain's sovereign immunity argument or Bolivia's indigenous rights claims gain real legal traction, the entire ownership picture gets redrawn again, with money potentially owed to parties who have never physically touched the wreck at all. Every one of these outcomes represents billions of dollars moving in a completely different direction, and as of right now, nobody, not Colombia, not Spain, not Sea Search Armada, not the courts, actually knows which one is going to happen. Which brings us to the question this channel always ends on. Who actually gets rich here? For 300 years, the honest answer was nobody. The fortune sat untouched, and every party with a claim to it was simply betting on a future that hadn't arrived yet. Even now, with actual artifacts finally coming up out of the water, the answer is still, remarkably, undetermined. Colombia has physical custody and political will, with a president who has made speeding up the recovery a personal priority before his term runs out. Sea Search Armada has a decades-old paper claim and an active arbitration case that could still be worth billions. Spain has a legal argument rooted in the idea that a sovereign warship never stops belonging to its sovereign, no matter how long it's been underwater. And the Bolivian communities whose ancestors mined this silver under conditions this channel's other Potosí episode goes into in more detail, have a moral and increasingly legal claim that the earliest link in this entire chain of ownership has been overlooked for 3 centuries. That's what makes the San José different from every other shipwreck in this series. It was never really a story about a ship that sank. It's a story about how long a fortune can sit in genuine limbo, real, valued in the billions, physically recoverable, and still, after 300 years, with absolutely no settled answer to the single most basic question you could ask about any pile of money: whose is it? The gold is real, the emeralds are real, the explosion that sent them to the bottom in under an hour was real, but the ownership of the San José was never decided by the battle that sank her. It's being decided right now, in courtrooms and government offices, by people who have never seen the wreck, arguing over a fortune that has outlasted the empire that built it, the navy that sank it, and very possibly, the legal systems now trying to divide it up.